Okay, so now we're going to get started. Now, as I said before in our earlier uh, session, I always start off with a story, and in this case, this is a true story. So we call this the Russian coffee story. A number of years ago, I went to Russia and I was doing some filming with a group of individuals to look at the orphanage situation in Russia. So this was really a long time ago. And we really wanted to make this a really positive experience. We didn't want to show this doom and gloom thing. And so we really were coming at this with an angle of being really positive, which it turned out to be really good and very positive and helpful. And so, so we spent a couple of weeks in Russia. And if you haven't traveled a lot, when you do travel overseas, there's a lot of walking. And so we didn't do a lot of driving. It was mostly walking. And so we were really tired. And towards the end of our trip, we spent some time in Moscow. And my friend and I, and then the doctor who was accompanying us, and he was our interpreter, we decided to have a cup of coffee. And so Viola and I went into this restaurant, and I am not kidding you, it was massive. It looked like 1,000 people could sit there. It was just huge. And for whatever reason, we happened to be the only people that were there. So we walked up to the counter, and this woman was sitting there, and she had a white jacket on and a white hat. And she said, my friend Viola said to Alex, would you please tell her I'd like a cup of coffee and with some milk? And so Alex says to her in Russian, she would like to buy a cup of coffee and with some milk. And the woman looked at Viola, and she looked at Alex, and she looked very stern. And then she looked again and she said, "Niet," which means no. And so I was like, oh my gosh, I was sitting at the table and I was watching this whole thing unfold, and Viola had this really shocked look on her face, and Alex was really shocked. And of course, I'm sitting at the table thinking to myself, oh my gosh, something's going to happen. We're going to learn something really cool. So I'm over there laughing, wondering what's going to unfold with this story. And so Viola says, you know what? I'm not really sure why she said that. Alex, why did she not want to sell me some coffee with some milk? And he's like, I don't know, Viola, I don't know what's going on. And so she thought for a moment. She goes, I think I know what the problem is. And so she said, Alex, tell this lady that I would like to buy a cup of coffee, and then I also want to buy a glass of milk. And so Alex said, okay, I'll do it. So he says in Russian again, he asked the woman, she would like to buy a cup of coffee, and she would also like to buy a glass of milk. And no kidding, the lady looks at Alex and then looks at Viola and says to Alex, is this woman, and she's saying, of course, in Russian, is this woman going to put milk in her coffee? And Alex says, yes, she is. And so the woman shouted, Niet! Again. And so Viola comes back to the table that we're sitting at with just a cup of black coffee, a really old cup of black coffee. And we were laughing about it. She was quite frustrated about it, but there's something that we had to learn from this. So why do you think that this woman did not want to sell milk to Viola, even if she paid for it, to put in her coffee? Just think about that for a minute. And no, I'm not drinking coffee, I'm drinking tea. And so what do you think? Well, some people say, well, maybe it's not her custom to put milk in the coffee. You know, maybe she didn't want to put milk in the coffee. It could be a number of different things. I mean, there's a lot of different reasons, but here's what I learned, because remember, the most important thing is what you learn. And some of the things we learned aren't really obvious. You have to really look for those little nuggets. And so here's what I took away from that. Now, this was a woman prior to the collapse of the wall, and this happened just a few years after when we were there. So before that, under communism, Viola, or not Viola, pardon me, when you worked in or lived in Russia, you took jobs based upon, many times, what kind of job they told you to take. And so this woman was serving coffee. She didn't look like she enjoyed it, to be honest. What if this woman wanted to be a violin teacher? What if this woman wanted to be a doctor or a nurse? Maybe this woman wanted to work in a zoo. or maybe she wanted to do gardening. Maybe she wanted to be an auto mechanic. It could be a number of different things that she wanted to do, but she was not doing that. This woman, for her life, got to sell coffee every day. So someone may have come up to her and said, okay, guess what you get to do the rest of your life? You get to serve coffee. And it could have really discouraged her. So think about it. What if someone came up to you and said, this is the job that I want you to do for the rest of your life? And I know that some of you that are watching this, you've had this experience. I have, where somebody says, this is what you're going to do, period, and you don't have any choice in the matter. Now think about how that made you feel. What was going on in your mind when you realized, I have to take a job that I don't want to take? I am going to be doing something like this for the rest of my life, or I'm going to hop from job to job to job because I don't even know what kind of job, but it's miserable every time I'm doing it. Well, that's what happened to this lady. And so if you can imagine under the previous government where she didn't have a choice in the matter, she had to do what she was told. But things have changed. Now the wall collapsed. Russia was trying to reorganize and do a different type of government where there was a little bit more freedom involved in terms of what you could choose to do. But this woman still had the mindset that she was in the past. And so this woman was free, but she didn't know how to be free. Now think about that. That's us. I mean, seriously, that's us. We are free, but we don't know how to be free. And that's incredibly frustrating. And so the conclusion with this is our next life lesson. If I change what I think, I will change what I see and do. So I want you to write that down. When I change what I think, I will change what I see and do. Now that's really important because what we learn from that is that everything in our life is governed by the way we think. And if we don't change our thinking, our life will continue the same trajectory that it's been our whole existence. And we may miss the sun or our goals, just like the illustration we used in the Money Thing Principle. And so it's really important to go into this with a real open mind to say, look, I'm just going to put everything to the side, all my beliefs, everything that I thought was important. I'm going to set it to the side for a short period of time. Trust me, you're not going to be harmed by it. And I want you to go into this with a different viewpoint that maybe if I make some small adjustments in my thinking, I can have a different path. Now, I want to give you another illustration with this. How many of you have ever had the experience where you heard some information about a friend? Let's just say it was a friend of yours. And someone came up to you and said, hey, you know what, Sally said this about you, and she's saying all these things about you, and you got really angry. And you thought, oh, what a terrible friend. I'm not going to be her friend anymore. And you might have called her up or sent her a text or got on Facebook and blasted her and said, you know what, I'm finished with you. I think this is terrible. And then you found out later that none of those things were true. See, what happened in the first case is you had a slight change in your thinking. And so you reacted to it. You actually had an action that followed. And then later, you had yet another slight change in your thinking. And then it changed your behavior afterwards. Maybe you went to Sally and said, hey, I'm really sorry. I shouldn't have done any of these things, and I shouldn't have believed that person. Please forgive me. And so these are examples that we do every day. And so I say this as an encouragement to you that you are actually modifying your thinking every day. Every day you're making small adjustments in your thinking, and then of course your behavior will follow that. And so this is a reminder to you as a life lesson. And for some of you, it might be your favorite life lesson. Maybe life lesson number 1, this too shall pass, will be your favorite. Or this one, when I change what I think, I will change what I see and do. And so it's the reminder, we do it all the time. So don't panic when you hear me talk about it's important for you to change your thinking. Go back to this and reflect and say, okay, well, it's not going to upset me, I'm not going to get scared or worried, because I realize I do that every day. I just need to learn some tools so that I'm doing it the right way. Okay? Now, as I said in the introduction, we're going to talk about some things about poverty. So let's take a look at some facts about poverty. Poverty exists in all races. True or false? Well, it's true. Poverty does exist in all races. Poverty is relative. And what I mean by that is what's poverty to one person is not poverty to another person. And here's an example of that. And I'm going to use kind of a economic maybe illustration for this. In West Africa, if you have a cinder block house that's just one room and with holes for windows where you don't have any glass or anything there, so the breeze can go through, and you have enough fish and rice for your family every day, you are considered wealthy. Now think about that. If you compare that with where you're living, you might think, oh my gosh, that guy in Africa, he's totally impoverished. Not so. This guy's really wealthy. And so poverty is relative. What's a lot of money to one person isn't necessarily a lot of money to another person. And so what we want to underscore here and really get across to you is that poverty is the loss of quality of life. And so as I mentioned in the introduction, you may have poverty in your relationships. You might have poverty in your career path. Maybe you hate it. Maybe you say, this is just making me ill. I'm physically sick when I go to work. That's poverty, because the opposite of poverty would be an investment into your life and you would love it. And so when you feel loss or lack in an area of your life, that's poverty. And that's important for us to remember as we go through Core Purpose. Okay, now, here's something that's really interesting. We want to talk about the two types of poverty. There's situational poverty, and then there's generational poverty. What do you think the difference is between the two? Well, situational poverty means that something has happened in your life and suddenly you're experiencing a loss in that area. Now, let's just talk about economics. Let's say you're married and you have a house and a couple of cars and a couple of dogs, and you go to the movies all the time and there's no financial worries, and then there's a divorce or a death or a sickness, and suddenly that income is not happening and you are temporarily in economic poverty. That would be situational, okay? Versus generational. Now, generational poverty says that you are on public assistance, your mother has been on public assistance, and your grandmother was on public assistance. So you got a couple of generations that say, this is the way that my life has been. And so let's examine these two types of poverty. So which group do you think is harder to leave? Well, of course, generational poverty is harder to get out of because that's what you know. You've learned a certain behavior in economics, and this is how you live your life. And so it's much more difficult to get out of that type of poverty because you don't have any role models in your immediate family. And let's not forget that our family unit, that's the first teacher that we have. And so the things that we learn in our family are much more difficult to break out of than if we learned something from society, because that's just the way the family construct works. And so it's really important to understand why people have a hard time of getting out of generational poverty, because they don't have the examples in their family where people are problem solving their way out of poverty. Okay, so we need to be aware of that. Situational poverty is easier to get out of because you've already experienced maybe a higher economic position in your community. And so you know the tools and you know what to do in order to get out of that. Maybe it's to find a different job or a number of different things. You might have relational resources also that would be helpful for you that people in generational poverty don't have. And so you actually have a life tool, a skill to learn how to problem solve your way out of that type of poverty. Now, is it possible to have generational poverty in your relationships? Think about that one. I want you to think about your family and the type of relationships you've had within your family. Were you close? Was there a lot of fighting? Was there a lot of betrayal taking place? Did people not care about one another, or did they take care of each other? What did that look like in your family? And say, wow, actually the family, there was a lot of broken relationships. There was a lot of boyfriend, girlfriends coming in and out of the house. There was a lot of fighting with the parents. There was a lot of stress in the family. There was a lot of picking on one another, kind of bullying each other, even within the siblings. That is something that is a learned behavior within a family unit, and that would be considered generational poverty. And that's really tough. Just like I said, with economic poverty to get out of, it's very difficult to work your way out of generational poverty in relationships if it was modeled for you in your home. And so we have to really take a look at that and realize that, wow, what if I had that type of life experience in my home? And even though economically I'm doing really well and I live in a nice house and I have good income and my needs are met and we have extra money for vacations, but I really am suffering from having consistent failed relationships in my life. People in my life disappoint me. I'm sure I disappoint them, but I'm always having some type of chaos or negative drama with relationships. Well, that's because though you are doing okay economically, you've learned generational poverty in relationships. And so these are things that you need to think about as we start going through Core Purpose, because we're going to tackle some of these problems, okay? And so what you want to do is complete this page, and when we're finished with the discussion of it, and then you'll come back to the next session, and you'll have this page completed. Okay, so now in order to understand poverty, even we have to understand what quality of life looks like, because we have to do a comparison between the two. So what I want you to do is spend some time on this, and it might be some time tonight when you're not bothered by the kids or you're not working, you're having a cup of coffee or a cup of tea, and just relaxing and saying, okay, what does quality of life look like for me? And so what you need to do is make a list here of what you really want your life to look like. Now, nothing is wrong on this list. So if you say, I want a swimming pool because it reminds me of having my family time and really enjoying my house and stuff, that's really okay. You can do that. Now, if you put, hey, I want to be a millionaire and I want to do this, I'm going to think, well, that might be stretching it, especially if you have never worked a day in your life, okay? And so there's some steps that you may have to take to get to that point. I'm wanting you to draw a picture. I want you to create an image with your words. What does quality of life look like? And so let me give you some suggestions. Healthy relationships, physical health, good mental health, healthy food, a reliable transportation, a nice car, a nice house. Maybe you want a garden. How about you want stable economic position in your life? So it doesn't have to be $1 million, but you can say stability in your finances. That's actually massive for anybody. Even the most wealthy person will tell you, hey, I don't even have to be a millionaire as long as my financial position is stable. Okay, so a stable financial position, that's important for everybody. Happy family. What about love? How about that? Would you like love in your life? How about peace? Making sure that there isn't the negative drama. I think peace is really important in terms of quality of life. How about a good education? How about good neighbors? A safe neighborhood, a safe community? How about joy in your life? Saying, I just want to really experience that deep joy. I can love my life. I'm at peace and I'm happy at the same time. So what you want to do is put this whole list together and see what kind of a model that you come up with. And then when you're completed with it, you need to ask yourself, am I actually achieving the desires of my heart? Am I experiencing this? Do I really have healthy relationships in my life? Do I have good problem solving skills? Am I experiencing purpose? Because that should be number one on your list. Purpose is really important. And if you're not experiencing some of these things that you really would love to have in your life, then just say no. Be honest with yourself. No, I'm not. Can I improve them? What are some areas of my life that I haven't yet achieved yet? And you're going to want to write that down. And so here's something that's an interesting little fact, though, about this quality of life piece. In quality of life, regardless of where I teach it around the world, and it doesn't make any difference in all the countries, in all the other ethnic groups, religions, economic viewpoints. It doesn't make any difference where I'm teaching this. Did you know that everybody around the world make the same list? Isn't that interesting? Why do you think that is? Why do you think that the list in your hometown, wherever you live, whether it's in Texas or Colorado or Florida or California, New York, the Philippines, Japan, West Africa, Bangladesh, why do you think they have the same list? The reason is we all have one thing in common. We're human. And humans do want the same thing regardless of where you live because it's part of our DNA. And so that is, to me, a huge idea and a huge expression of the connection that we actually have with one another. And so we're actually closer tied than we think to one another, especially when you feel lonely and you feel discouraged and like you don't have a lot of relationships in your life. Then what happens is you don't feel that connection. And so this is going to help you understand too that you're actually more connected and you're more like other people in this world than you thought. So don't feel guilty, don't feel ashamed of putting this list down. Now here's a word of caution, okay, when you're making this model. I was teaching this class and this woman really struggled with it. And one of the reasons why she was struggling with it is in this particular classroom, we did have a guy in there that said, yeah, a swimming pool was important to him in his quality world because he actually had a swimming pool in his house. And but he had a really tight family, and so they were always getting together with the children and the grandchildren. And even though he himself didn't spend a lot of time in the swimming pool, it was important for him because to him it was creating life experiences with this family that were positive. And so it was wonderful. And then this other person was saying, yeah, I want to have extra money so that I can take vacations. And so this woman struggled with it because she thought it was excessive. And she said, no, I don't think that's, I disagree with a lot of things on this list because you don't need a swimming pool to have a quality of life. You don't need a reliable car. You don't need, and she was listing all the things that she disagreed with. And so as we began talking to her about this, I was very interested with this because this was an unusual response to something like, what does quality of life look like to you? And as it turned out, she had been a missionary for her whole life. And as a missionary, she, in the group that she was involved with, it was all about sacrifice. And so what you weren't allowed to have anything that would be considered a luxury because after all, that could be used towards her missions group, or she could give that money to somebody else who had less money than her. And so in her mind, having anything less than almost nothing became excessive. And I thought that was so interesting because she was such a wonderful woman, but I knew in her life, because I knew her personally, how she really was struggling with so many different issues in her life. And so I then asked her this question. And so this question might help you as you're creating your quality of life model. I asked her, well, what kind of quality of life would you like for your children? Would you like for your children to have the things that we're putting on this list, or would you want them not to have any of that at all? And she thought for a moment and she said, you know what, you're right. I think that I would love for this stuff to happen for my kids. And so she was able to then see that, you know what, I've forgotten what it looked like to believe that I was actually worth having something more than nothing. And so if you run into that as you're going through this model, just remember this story because you are worth it. You are so worth it. Anything in your life that you think that would enhance and make your life fun and enjoyable, write it down because that's part of what your quality of world will look like. Okay? All right. Now, we're going to finish this up. Spend some time reflecting on a couple of those exercises and really start thinking about poverty and start thinking about situational and generational poverty, and then really consider about your quality of life, what that needs to look like in your world. and then we'll catch up at the next session.